Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Assistant Professor of Communication and Media at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on Twitter at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. In this episode, we're going to take a bit of a different approach towards the academic study of communication by looking into information theory, which is a mathematical approach to communication that studies the quantification, storage, and communication of information. So before we get into that, we can think about how scholars tend to study political communication, for example, which is what we often talk about on this podcast, where we might look at, okay, what are the strategies of politicians? How do they use social media? And what effect does that communication have on voters? So that's kind of one way to look at communication. Then there is the more mathematical side, which again tries to quantify the amount of information that's passed through a communication medium. So there we get heavily into statistics, which I'll admit is not my strong suit, but we can think about if we can quantify information, we can learn how to compress it. And that's exactly what information theory has led to. Technology behind zip drives and putting bits of information onto a compact disk comes out of this mathematical study of communication. And so when we want to study algorithms, this is quite a natural approach because we can quantify the amount of information that's passed from human to machine and then back from machine to user. And so my guest today is Professor Martin Hilbert. He's a professor of communication at the University of California, Davis, and he's done a lot of work applying information theory to studies of the digitalization of society and more recently, algorithmification and quantifying the amount of emotions that go from humans to machines and back from machines to users and whether that leads to political polarization. So we're going to dive into those studies and talk about information theory more broadly. And I think it's important to note we use the word entropy a lot. And entropy is essentially how communication is measured in information theory. So entropy is roughly equivalent to the level of uncertainty. The higher uncertainty you have, the less information you have. And so if you think back to your statistics class where you have to predict the probability that the card you draw in a deck of 52 cards would be a jack of spades, the uncertainty there is higher. So it has higher entropy than a coin flip, because there's only two possible outcomes. So there's less uncertainty in predicting the outcome of that random event. We can also define entropy as the negative of the sum of the probability of each event multiplied by the log of the probability of each event. So you can see how these concepts very quickly get into high-level math. And even if you get a bit lost in some of these statistical terms as we go through the episode, I think it's still interesting to think about the core idea, which is approaching communication from the quantification of information and how that really works when you're trying to measure the input and output from machines. So if you want to read more about it, I'll link to the studies we discuss in the episode down in the show notes. And towards the end, we'll get into a 7-part medium series that Professor Hilbert has written, reflecting more of his current thinking about detaching from social algorithms after the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Professor Hilbert, who knows way more about information theory than I do. Once again, he is a professor of communication at University of California, Davis. Professor Hilbert, thanks for taking the time out and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into your recent work on algorithms, I thought we'd start out here by discussing information theory. As a mathematical approach to communication, what exactly is information theory and why is it useful in studying computer-mediated communication?
Well, so information theory was born in 1948 by Claude Shannon, who is basically the father of the digital age. He single-handedly basically invented the digital age. So information theory is a branch of probability theory. And what Shannon basically said is that, okay, so how can we measure information? He said, well, information is the opposite of uncertainty, right? I mean, you have more uncertainty, you have less information. I give you information. What that does is it reduces the uncertainty. And therefore he said, well, uncertainty we can model with probability theory, right? So then obviously we can also model the opposite. And that's how he set out and developed this framework where he then said, well, how you measure that is by how much uncertainty you reduce, because then I know how much information you got, right? And so he developed this measure called the bit. And a bit is that reduces uncertainty by half. And it's very flexible, this measure. So he invented the bit measured by entropy. And with that, set on the race that developed the digital age. So engineers jumped on it, developed, digital communication, digital computation as well. Shannon worked in that as well in his master thesis. And that's how it came out. So it's basically probably the most influential theory, surely, of this century.
Yeah. And is that bit the same thing we think about, like, the bits we often talk about with computers? Is that the same?
Absolutely, yeah. So there are two different ones. Shannon's ones are optimally compressed bits. So it's only a binary digit, could be any kind of like a 1 and 0, up or down, current or no current, light or not light in a fiber optic, right? And it becomes an entropic bit, a Shannon bit, if that 1 or 0 reduces uncertainty by half. So if I tell you, I don't know how this coin flip turns out, and then I send you light through the fiber optic, it becomes its heads, otherwise its tail, and it reduces uncertainty exactly by half, then you got one bit of uncertainty got reduced. So that's this measure of entropy.
Yeah, it's a very technical and mathematical statistic approach to communication. And it's not one that I had really come across before. So I'm excited to get into how you can apply this.
So Shannon actually called it, he was very humble, he called it a mathematical theory of communication. Then a science promoter, Weaver, joined up with him and published his paper as a book, and he called it the mathematical theory of communication, and it's the mathematical theory of communication. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then one of the things I thought was interesting that I think you wrote about one of your papers was about how a lot of this research on communication from an information theory perspective was focused on telephones, because that was the medium sort of the day. And there you have a relatively neutral or passive communication channel between sender and receiver, right? It just goes from one person to the other. But today, with especially social media platforms, we have these active intermediaries that filter information flows in the form of algorithms. And you've done a lot of work on this. So could you describe the concept of algorithmification for us and how it adds complexity and bias to communication?
Now, remember, Michael, I'm German. I'm allowed to invent long words nobody else can pronounce. So algorithmification is a word I have coined and have started using over the last probably almost decade. So because I've always worked in this field, right? And I've worked on digitalization. Well, there's digitalization. And what that basically does is taking analog information flows or communication flows and puts them into a digital form, which has different characteristics to it. So what we do now is we take processes and put them in digital form, and that's algorithmification, right? So we algorithmify human behavior, for example. We algorithmify cultural conducts. We algorithmify laws. There's an automatization aspect to it, right? So that's what algorithmification is. It's the same as digitalization, just applied to processes. So the study of information theory to study these kind of processes, be it digitalization or algorithmification, for me, it's just very natural, because information theory, as I said, is that what these processes are based on? Like, actually, that's what it is, right? So this theory has been developed, and digitalization and algorithmification is an outgrowth of it. So why do we not use this theory to study these kind of processes, right? So because in this information theory, you have many measures that are very relevant. Uncertainty, I said already, entropy, that's the technical term for uncertainty. Mutual information, complexity. Recently, we studied the complexity of the stock market and how it increases by using more algorithms. So you have these measures which are very natural, and they have a real meaning. Uncertainty, information, knowledge, complexity. They have a real meaning then. They have measured, and we can measure them. So I just think it's the natural language. That's number one. The first argument why information theory, I think, is the natural language to study these kind of processes. And second of all, it's very similar to our traditional statistics. And the benefit is that it's nonlinear. So I don't need all these linear assumptions. For example, uncertainty, entropy, is quite similar to a variance. And as I explained to you entropy, I said, like, okay, so How 50-50 is, for example, the result. Well, that's how uniform the distribution is. I could also use variance to see how spread out things are or how peaked they are in the distribution, right? But I can also use entropy. Same for mutual information, which is the other big measure that we use in our studies, which is very similar to a correlation. Now, the downside of using variances and correlations is I need all these assumptions about linearity and about normal distributions underlying. And if I use just information theory, I don't need any of that. I don't need to assume that the transformation that an algorithm does is linear or normal. I just say, well, it is what it is, and I just calculate the number. No requisites required, and that's very powerful.
And is that possible because algorithms are basically pre-programmed and therefore highly predictable and non-complex? Or how would you kind of put that into the information theory perspective?
The second perspective, the nonlinearity, no, let me just clarify that maybe a little bit, because that might be interesting. So you can use information theory, just finish the point about information. You can use information theory on any study. It doesn't have to be algorithms. You can basically, instead of calculating a variance, you can calculate the entropy. And instead of calculating a correlation, you can calculate the mutual information. It's just that these measures pick up much more of what's going on in the transformation. Right. So, for example, imagine like a correlation between two things, an X and a Y, and you have a two-dimensional plot. And now I draw an O. Right. I draw really a circle in that XY plot. A correlation will not pick really up anything. Right. A correlation is just like, does it go up or down? Well, it's an O. A mutual information will pick up that pattern. So basically, what Shannon did, he developed this theory to pick up any kind of pattern that happens in a transformation from input and output. Now, he studied a telephone sender and receiver, but he said, like, I don't know what the relation between these two is when they are communicating. Now, we could say they're positively correlated. For example, the sender sends a lot of happiness and the receiver gets happy. Okay, there's a positive correlation. But there might be all kind of things going on between sender and receiver. And I want to pick up everything that sender and receiver have to do with each other, because that's what communication is. So I basically just study what's going on in this channel, and I pick up all the different patterns, and I can give it a number. And that's basically what these information theoretic measures then say. How much uncertainty is in the channel left, how much information gets really reflected by the sender in the receiver, that's the mutual information, and so forth. So I can pick up these different things. And talking about the deterministic aspect of algorithms, I can also see how much is really transferred and how much is, well, traditionally, the telephone people or Shannon would have called it noise. That's a distortion of the intended message. But in our times, it's not like Facebook or Google really, they purposely distort it, right? They distort it in order to have financial gains. That's the big message about supposedly free social media. Of course, it's not free. It's paid by the baked-in distortion into these channels.
Right. And then basically by studying these patterns within the channels, it makes it technically possible to kind of reverse engineer these algorithms by studying exactly that pattern between user input and algorithmic output. And so that brings me to your study on how recommender systems on YouTube and Twitter respond to emotional input from users. And I think the design here is really cool. So can you walk us through the YouTube case first in terms of how you went about testing the relationship between emotional input and output?
Yeah, so you basically think about a communication channel. Okay, I'm in the department of communication, right? So you have a sender and a receiver. Now I can say this communication channel could be, let's start even with a simpler case, could just be a natural language processing neural net. So I give it some words, anger and fear. And, these neural nets, many social science researchers use them. It converts them into like how much anger, how much fear there is, right? So I can use that as a channel, a transformation channel. A channel is basically something that transforms something. And I can see if I put the word anger into this neural net, what's the number it gives me? Does it tell me it's anger, or what's the number, what is the output on the other side? And that works pretty well because that's how the neural net was trained. That's its goal. That's the accuracy measure, actually. That's how the computer scientists say, why a neural net is very accurate. It can detect anger, or it can detect motorcycles versus cars. And I can do that, of course, then also with a recommender system. I can put something in and I look for something and I see the output that the recommender system gives me. For example, I can put in emotions and I look at emotions to stay in that case. And I can see if I get back videos, what kind of videos I get back and how angry and sad and fear inducing these videos actually are by evaluating the content of these videos. So I can see kind of like, yeah, how noisy the channel is, or if it's really a one-to-one translation, if it's really as deterministic as you think it would be.
Yeah. And you took like synonyms of words, wasn't it? And
right.
put them into the recommender system and built a scraper to pull the video content out and analyze the transcripts? Or what exactly was the approach there?
Right. So these recommender systems, they're basically black boxes, and nobody really knows how they work. Not even the people who programmed them know really how they work, right? So because they basically, they evolve. They are kind of like a complex adaptive system, and these recommender systems evolve by incentives, which are basically given mainly by A/B testing. So these engineers just look like, okay, what hits harder and what gets you spend more time on it. The YouTube recommender algorithm has actually a name. It's called the watch time maximization algorithm. So guess what that's doing? It basically maximizes the time you spend on there. Now, why or how you spend more time on this or that kind of video, nobody really cares. The algorithm just maximizes that. And then since not even the people who coded that app can kind of like predict what the algorithms do, our argument is you have to study them as these unpredictable behavioral beings, just like you study humans. So you have to study them like we run humans through a lab. We have to run these algorithms through a lab. And we might find out even more than the same people who set them up, these algorithms, how these algorithms actually work. And we can take biases. There have been a lot of studies on biases, right? So you put something into the algorithm, it spits out some things. Many of these algorithms, they're completely racist and sexist. So why are they racist and sexist? Well, they just like A/B studied what humankind was teaching them. And then we have to see like, okay, so how racist and sexist actually are they? And yeah, what can we do about that in order to tune down whatever we don't want to be baked into this algorithm?
Right. But what I thought was interesting is that when you fed in a bunch of words relating to certain emotions like joy and anger, it wasn't just that, if you fed anger into the YouTube recommender system, that you would get anger out.
Right.
There was kind of a distortion there. And so what exactly was it that was the kind of overriding factor? I think regardless of whatever emotion you put in, there was one that came out.
Yeah, so you can actually see that. So the one we did the one study, coincidentally, we did it like on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. And because then we looked at the data and a lot of anger, fear, disgust, and sadness got channeled to joy. So we had no idea why that. And then we realized, oh, it was April Fool's Day, right? So that's the recommender algorithm on that day. Even if you put something anger or fear inducing in, like a person falling and hitting themselves hard and really getting hurt, on April Fool's Day, it becomes a funny video, right? Because people really want to laugh on that day, or it's a prank or something. So you can study these things and reverse engineer what's going on. And information theory just helps you to see like what input from the channel converts what to the output. So these engineers studied that because they studied the noise in the channel. You can think about it like the setup of Shannon is actually the setup adapted by Bayesian statistics. So if you think about right now in the pandemic, we talk a lot about false positives and false negatives and all these Bayesian conditioning on one side and the others. That's actually how this channel is set up. And then you can see like, oh, a false positive, that would be defined as noise. Or a false negative, that would also be defined as noise because it doesn't convert a positive into a positive or negative into a negative. It diverts it. It's noisy. It's a noisy communication channel. Same as for us on April Fool's Day, the sad videos got converted into joy. So you can study all of that. And the metrics are given, and they're 70 years old. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can sort of, I think a lot of people would just, at least around the sort of general media narrative, it's like, people put in something that is kind of controversial, and that leads them down the rabbit hole to racism or, all this this type of nasty content. But it's not necessarily that, back and forth clean, right? As you said, there's a lot of noise in there as well. And I think what's interesting about the April Fool's case is that noise kind of comes from the social context of the sort of norm that is April Fool's Day.
And that's the interesting thing. So these are often surprising results. Same as Bayesian conditioning is surprising, right? So I condition my expectation is that the expectations for you of what is the difference between false positive and false negatives. Right now in the pandemic, as I said, we talk a lot about that. The false positive rate is not the same as the false negative rate. And on the other hand, as well, if I expect what my expectation is of being false is different. So as confusing as Bayesian conditioning is, as confusing are these channels. So Facebook and Google, they condition your search inquiry in order for them to optimize their financial gains. Now, that can have completely unintended consequences on the condition of the user and how you're channeled down this rabbit hole. That's why you actually have to unpack this channel and saying, conditioned on the fact that I look for example, a health video. What is the probability that YouTube sends me down to anorexia? As so often commented for 14-year-old girls, right? Well, from the point of view of Google, they're just like, hey, what gets the most attention? Oh, the 14-year-old girl pays a lot of attention to this video. I don't know what. Oh, it's about anorexia. Who cares, right? And you can actually then start and retrace these kind of like the noise in this communication channel. Recommender engines are communication channels, active ones that shape actively this transformation.
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of noise and proactivity. And I think, the listeners of this podcast would be interested to hear about the effect that those type of proactive systems have on people's political preferences. And to explore that, you ran an experiment that manipulated YouTube's recommendation algorithms and tested their effect on political polarization. And like we've been discussing, a key part of that experiment was a focus on emotions and the transfer of emotions between humans and machines. So could you outline the motivations for studying polarization via the YouTube algorithm and why you chose to focus on the transfer of emotions specifically?
Yeah, well, among scholars, there's always there's the optimal and the necessary. So we got to emotions because they're quite easy to detect and they hit hard. so there's the practical, the pragmatic aspect of it, why we studied emotions. And the more that we studied emotions, the more we saw like, wow, they have a really interesting effect. So spoiler alert, end of the study, what we found, for example, is that, and that was around the 2016 election, the week after the 2016 election, we did that. And we actually found out that joy polarizes people and sadness brings them together, which is, once you think about it, it makes sense, right? So sadness produces something in us is like, oh my God, okay, it's okay, let's come together, let's see, that's really sad. Whereas joy, the left and right go their own way. That's why they are joyful, right? I knew I was right, the confirmation bias and so forth. So that's interesting, we thought, because, getting these recommender algorithms right is not an easy task. I mean, that's the question of 1 in a billion right now in Silicon Valley too, how to get them right, because we have this multidimensional space. We don't know what to represent people in order to get them together. So these neural nets, right, they have 800 dimensions or even more, 5,000 dimensions. So which one of these dimensions do I actually focus on in order to reduce polarization? What I do know, there's one direction that I can always show you that's basically the eigenvector in this multidimensional space that basically continues what you have seen in the past. So whatever you've seen in the past, I basically extrapolate that. I show you more of that. Well, we know that leads to polarization. But what else can I show you? And we found, so that's the outcome of the study, that actually emotions might be interesting dimensions in this multidimensional vector space to focus on. And if I show you more sad content, it brings people together. Now, of course, Facebook will not be excited to show us really depressingly sad videos all day long. But yeah, I think it might be one of the keys in this puzzle, in this mathematically difficult puzzle of how do I measure what content to show you if I don't show you the most primitive thing, which is just show you what you've liked in the past, which is basically, the extrapolation of what happened in the past. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to pick up on a few things you said there, but I think the sort of design here is really cool in terms of how you actually manipulated the algorithm or, set up for showing the stimuli to your participants. So could you kind of talk about the method of that study a bit?
Sure. So I think the crux here is you can manipulate these recommender algorithms. There's a script in Python. We've grown up a Python script, and it's called Selenium. That's basically a web browser automatization software. So basically everything you do on your web browser with your mouse, Selenium will do for you. So actually on the other side, they often don't even know if that's a scraper or if it's a human, because literally the mouse moves like magic over your monitor, right? So what we did is we basically asked people about their political opinion and then used their political opinion and took a virgin YouTube account and basically in real time then biased that YouTube account with their political opinion. So if they told us they're Trumpians or they're Clinton supporters or whatever, or they are against climate change or whatever. So we took this political opinion and basically let a virgin YouTube account watch, I don't even remember how many dozens or hundreds of videos, and you have to let them watch like for 3-4 seconds. So it goes into the watch history. And then the algorithm basically watched YouTube videos. And then we asked, once we had this biased account, the account biased to this person's interest, we just saw what videos were recommended next. And we showed these videos to people and saw how these kind of videos would influence them. Of course, then against the control group and another neutral group. And then we could see what effects these videos that were primed to their specific interests would have on them. And we could actually calculate, something similar to what is a causal measure, Granger causality, which is called transfer entropy, and see the effect, the causal effect that these videos would have on their emotions.
Right. And you already kind of outlined that. It's interesting that sadness actually was a sort of reducing that polarization measure, whereas joy seemed to increase it. And so one of the things that was interesting is that partisanship played an interesting role here. Could you outline the role of partisanship in that sort of relationship between emotions and polarization?
Yeah, so we have to distinguish two different things. So we did in the study, there are two different channels, actually. One is from the user to the algorithm. That's one part of the channel, right? And then from the algorithm to the user. So it's actually a two-part, it's a concatenated channel that goes on. And we calculated the causality. So think, as I said, information theory is very similar to all the normal measures we have in linear statistics. So variance, okay, we have entropy, correlation, we have mutual information. And Granger causality, which is a Nobel Prize winning measure from econometric, which basically measures the linear causal predictability of one variable to the other, we have something similar in information theory called transfer entropy. So we basically measured the causal effect that the user has on the algorithm, on the recommender algorithm, by giving different emotions. And then the algorithm has on the user. We did a post-experiment survey with the user, and we could distinguish it there. And you can then really use these measures to piece that apart, and you can see how much joy flows into the algorithm, how much sadness get out. So the week after the election between Clinton and Trump, you could actually see that, for example, for Clinton, the algorithm tried to cheer people up because they were depressed after the 2016 election, right? And you could see more of that. So a lot of sadness flew in and a lot of joy then also flew out on the other hand. And for Trump, there was also a lot of disgust flowing out actually from the algorithm, not sure what that was. And obviously these measures just give you an idea of what to look for. Now, you could look in and was exactly how did the algorithm provoke disgust here? And then, well, you would have to look at the individual videos or tweets in order to get more insight. But these measures, they give you a good overall picture of what to look for, as all summary statistics.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, because you have so much experience with algorithms and, you know, in this case, looking at how they affect political attitudes before and after this watch time with these various emotionally charged accounts by your Python script. You know, I'm wondering what you think about the development of tech as a form of sort of depolarizing the electorate or promoting positive democratic outcomes, because there's a lot of interest in building tech solutions that can sort of reduce hyperpartisanship. I mean, how do you see that? Do you think it's possible or a goal worth pursuing, or is that just too complex of a mathematical problem, or is it is the social and cultural influences too strong? Kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to. We blame these companies a lot and say, like, they don't care enough, and that's why they don't act. But it is mathematically a really challenging problem. Like, how do I define the variables and how do I define the content that I show you that results in convergence in contrast to polarization? Your preferences from the point of view of these content providers, your preferences are stored in a multidimensional space. It's kind of like one arrow in a multidimensional vector space, vert to vec or whatever you might imagine. And the easiest thing is just to continue this one arrow. And that's what they're doing right now. They're showing you content that you liked in the past. Now we know that polarizes. I could also show you the opposite, just the other direction of this arrow. And we also know that it will make you run away, because that will just be too extreme on the other end. You won't make sense of that, right? But there's an infinite number of other directions this arrow could point, especially in a multidimensional space like that, almost infinite, right? So which direction do I have to point the arrow, this vector, in order for you to spend time on the platform? I mean, they have to make money too, and actually to bring the convergence. So we don't know. In our study, we sort maybe look at the emotions and bring some sadness or compassion to people. And these are the important challenges that I think have to go in. And that's, a lot of research has to be done on that field. It's not a thing that will be solved anytime soon, just because mathematically set up, it's infinite, that the number of possibilities you have. So that's, I think, one, let's say, the tech challenge. On the other hand, I think it's also there's a human challenge. And that's what I got interested in recent research more, is how humans actually perceive online content, and if they can be more non-attached to how they actually process that. And that's more on the side of the human, not so much on the side of the algorithm, because there the genie's already out of the bottle.
Right. And I mean, I'm thinking about particularly this finding about sadness being depolarizing, where we're in a sort of state where, a lot of people are not the most happy during these coronavirus times. And so you've been doing a lot of thinking and writing through a series that's on Medium, and I'll link to it in the show notes, about social media distancing. And you advocate there for 4 different pathways forward. Could you outline what you think those sort of future pathways are in terms of how we can take advantage of this lockdown and kind of maybe distance ourselves from algorithms?
Great, yeah. So I think there are 4 paths forward, and they are all equally important, I think, in order to, so the pandemic has shown most of us how toxic actually these algorithms can be, right? We felt it for the first time, actually seeing the fear running through these networks. And even all of us who are like critics of fake news, we get this WhatsApp and it's like, what, really? That could that could end everything tomorrow? Or what? And we throw more hope than reason onto this WhatsApp. So I think the pandemic was an interesting time that showed many of us actually firsthand, even us, the scientists, right, how toxic that actually can be, this environment, especially because we depended on it during lockdowns 100% for social interactions. So I think the ways forward, I outlined 4 different ones. The 2 first ones are maybe the typical one, and it goes by the 2x2 matrix. So it's either they or we change the existent, or we bring up the new, right? So these are kind of like the 4 that makes these 4 options. So first of all, they, the big 5, these big 5 companies, which are more valuable for years than any other company in the history of humankind, right? Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook, like they have to change the way things are going forward. And we've seen some movement in there back and forth. Last year, Mr. Zuckerberg was very clear that he will not control anything that any politician will say in the election. Now, the month after the election, he put some labels on them and then shut down. The social media companies shut down some of their accounts. So they are doing something, and, they have to do something. These companies are extremely powerful, much more powerful than our democracies. If you take the 10 richest entrepreneurs, digital entrepreneurs, and see how much cash they have in their pocket, that's more than 90% of the world's countries. That means there are only 20 countries on this planet Earth out of the 200 countries that have a GDP, that have an economy, the entire economy now, that is more than what these 10 men, interestingly enough, have in their pocket. So they have to, hopefully they will come to reason and help us to solve this a little bit, because they are much more powerful than entire economies. So that would be the first one. The second one is that we, the people, regulate them. And a lot of talk has been going on there. And I think these are the 2 typical approaches. Now, then there are 2 other approaches. The new generation of entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, and engineers invent something new technology, and that's difficult to imagine, but there will be a life after Google. Google will be obsolete one day, and Facebook and Amazon too. And so what's the next big thing, right? And that's where, of course, talk about the blockchain. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not. All the talk about the blockchain is it's a powerful part of the mix, but think about it that way a little bit. And then the fourth is that we invent a new us, a new kind of human. And I think that's also what I got most interested in. And one of the things that got me excited about thinking about that, what is the kind of human we need in order to deal better with social media? I've done a big data study for the United Nations during the pandemic, and we just saw how the pandemic affected Latin America. And one thing that struck me, according to Facebook's own data, we used Facebook data, is that the interest in meditation tripled in every country. So while before the pandemic, interest in meditation was around, let's say, 5, 6, 7%, now Facebook claims that more than 20% of women, especially in Latin America, actively interested in meditation. And that has to do a little bit, I think, with the fact that people start to realize that, well, these technologies, they're extensions of our minds. And getting to know our minds a little bit better might be part of the solution of creating a new human that is better able to deal with our digital mind extensions.
And what exactly do you mean by, like, because I'm just thinking about, when I think new humans, I'm thinking also about like the next generation, right? And this is kind of where people are growing up on screens, where younger people tend to have higher watch times and more time spent on these devices. So could it be, in a sense, that if we're trying to sort of reinvent our relationship with tech, that older people would be better positioned to do that than younger people? Or sort of how do you see it?
Yes, because older people still remember a time where these digital mind extensions weren't so intrusive, right? So I do think there are extensions of our minds. So that's where these recommender algorithms also dog on, that we talked about before, right? They dog on to our emotions, they log on to our thoughts, and then that's where they get you, and that's where they drag it out, boom, and basically vomit it all over the internet for everybody else to see. Right? So who is in charge of your thoughts and your emotions? Are you in charge of it? Is it the algorithms who are in charge of your thoughts and your emotions? And I think the interest in meditation is kind of like part of that. And that's as old as humankind is. I don't say meditation something religious or spiritual or whatsoever. Just the study of your mind and what's going on in your mind. And we can do that right now. For example, let's do it. Stop. Take a breath and observe. Observe your thoughts. Now, is this thought yours? Has it been implemented by me, by a social media blog? Has it been implemented, an emotion you feel around it? And can you be sure that it's yours? Right, and now we can proceed, but that's kind of like the attitude as well, that I think there needs to be a self-reflection on our own thoughts and emotions in order to, stop this interaction between us and the algorithms. There's been an author, Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor, very important for me as a German. And he has this famous quote where he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. And these algorithms, they basically, what they do is they eliminate the space between stimulus and response. Right, so it's kind of like we have this addiction to thinking, and that's where they dog on, and that's where we don't have this freedom anymore to choose our response. That's why they call it persuasive technology, or that's what nudging does, and that's what all these manipulations do, right? So what these kind of practices, the ancient practices do, is get to know your thoughts, and just because you're stimulated doesn't mean you need to respond. And how in control are current humans? And going back to your questions, yes, I do think that especially young minds are not prepared for that. And that's something we have to look into on when a mind is actually prepared to deal with these, very strong stimulus response connections that these algorithms put onto us. And that's something in technological evolution that we just have to figure out. I mean, it took us some time to figure out that we don't allow a 14-year-old to drive a semi-truck. But we don't. There's some technologies that are just not done for certain ages, right? And so the question is, should it be allowed that young kids go on social media? And what's the right age? When is our mind prepared to deal with these digital mind extensions? And when do they start to understand what is the borderline between their own mind and their own emotions, and what's been triggered on them, and how can we develop that? And that's, I think, a very important other part of this talk that we have to work on, and that I put most of my current research interests into right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, this lack of space between stimulus and response. It reminds me of Soren Kierkegaard's conception of the self and critical reflection as that which makes us human. But that's probably a topic for another podcast. So, Professor Hilbert, thanks so much for taking the time out and sharing your research with us.
Thank you so much. And if there are any other questions, feel free. My digital footprint is readily available all over the internet. And Michael, thank you so much for continuing these conversations and uphold them, because I think that's one of the most important aspects of solving that we collectively talk about these things. So thank you so much for doing this podcast and talking about these issues, because these are problems that will stay with us for decades, and these are really deeply complex problems that won't have as easy solution and won't have a single solution. So we need everybody to join and help us in that together.
I've just been speaking with Martin Hilbert, Professor of Communication at UC Davis. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next time, I'll be speaking with Dr. Tamara Small from the University of Guelph about her new edited volume, Digital Politics in Canada. But until then, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Malmo. See you next time.